All right, beautiful humans, happy Monday. And we're back here with our fourth exploration in the space of embodied masculinity. So today here is with us Kevin Orosz. He is a author, speaker, visionary, explorer. And yeah, when I first came across you, Kevin, was when you did the conversation with Virginia on masculinity. And what stuck with me was you were saying that you didn't pick the work, but the work picked you. And there's something that really resonated with how you, yeah, showed up and really spoke about what masculinity is from a very feel compassionate and heart-led space. And so you've also written a book with three other or two other contributors. And so I feel what's touching me in your work is really that whole component around the archetypes from the warrior to the king. So we had a conversation last week with Tom speaking about kingship and then also the mid.
Freeze framed for the moment.
We got a still shot at Tobias here.
It might take a second for him to come back. Dude, what's the title of your book? First off.
Yeah, it's Sex, Masculinity and God, the Trilogues. And wrote that with Cattle Last and Daniel Dick, both amazing academic philosophers that shared a lot of the interests that we wrote about. So yeah, really amazing work. Find it on Amazon. And yeah, we'll actually be in Europe later this year, in Berlin and Denmark, presenting our work and facilitating at these men's convergences at a Mansein and the European men's movement in Denmark.
That's fantastic. Sounds stunning. How did the three of you come together?
Well, I mean, all the way back to when I was in university, I wanted to do my PhD in psychology, and I was studying evolutionary psychology. And Cadell, actually, I found his blog. He was writing, he was an anthropology master's student. He was writing a lot about evolutionary psychology. So I was really following his blog. I reached out to him, and then we had a chance crossing of our paths in Santa Cruz, California, where I'd moved to. And didn't speak for years. And then he reached out to me about my viral video on masculinity years later. And we just had an instant connection. He introduced me to Daniel, and we decided to start this project together.
Stunning. And you come at it specifically from more of a psychological approach or more existential psychology?
I mean, it's got everything. It's got everything. Yeah. Existential, evolutionary, tantra, philosophy, yoga, psychoanalysis. There's a lot of angles in there because we all bring very different perspectives to the table. But the work is quite like, if you're into psychology and philosophy and academic deeper layers, it'll definitely have something for you. It's also conversational, so it'll have something for really everyone.
Spectacular. Really, really spectacular. And one of the other things that you are is a high performance coach, facilitator as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you want to give us a little bit of background into what actually got you into this work?
Yeah, I mean, I never set out to really do coaching or mentorship. Like I said, I wanted to be an academic psychologist. I was fascinated by Jungian analysts and this whole world. So there was a part of me that was always good at that, like holding space, listening for people, supporting them, being of service. But yeah, basically I realized I couldn't work a university job, was miserable, couldn't work a corporate job, and read Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week, backpacked to Asia, and on that journey really started to write a lot. I knew I wanted to write. I wrote a blog, and then I found my way into yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong. So I went to India, studied yoga, and I moved back to LA and started teaching yoga to private clients and also doing personal training. So training people like calisthenics and strength exercises. And then basically I realized I was already coaching, and that's when I got certified as a coach. I actually studied with a teacher that was all about psycho-spiritual integration. So as people post plant medicine ceremonies, overcoming addiction and overcoming massive loss. And, you know, one thing led to another, men's work, meeting my business partners, and really getting into Tantra, authentic relating, and bioenergetics. Kind of just sent me on the course. Now I support mainly entrepreneurs and like high performers in business, both corporate and entrepreneurs, to, you know, create the most resilient relationships possible, and also create a work lifestyle balance that really supports them through biohacking, through time and strategy and tactical management, among many other things.
Sounds spectacular. So you were mid-flow when you were asking your question.
Yeah, the machine piece on that side didn't really work. But yeah, it was interesting when we just said flow, because one of the areas, Kevin, that I resonate with your work as well is in that whole space around flow. And I've seen you basically have these two lines in a way, where I feel on the one hand it's like being in flow and bioenergetics, and then on the other hand that much more like sexual exploration and honoring sexual power. And I feel there's a beautiful interconnectedness that I feel would be exciting to get more deeply into, like how sort of like flow and sexual energy and how this comes together in your work in supporting entrepreneurs and high performers.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the fact that sexuality, sexual energy, is the most powerful creative energy, period, for human beings, is my belief. I mean, and you could say it's love, and sexuality is a very high form of love. It literally created us, right? And it's also one of the most taboo energies that's marketed to us and also hidden or repressed by religions and governments worldwide, and has been for thousands of years. And I think there's a reason for that. Specifically for men, working with sexual energy can involve decoupling sexual energy from fetishism and fantasy and pornography, and also from depleting your life force and your jing by too much ejaculation. It can also involve, you know, creating the most intimate and meaningful relationship with a partner, which is going to then feed forward into your work, into your athletic performance, into your business performance, into your creative and innovation performance. So Tantra and sexuality and mastering your sexual energy is not just about, you know, being a better lover or lasting longer in bed or anything like this, although it can start there. It's ultimately a mastery of self. And the bedroom is the dojo. So how you show up in sexuality is how you show up everywhere. And it's also the most vulnerable, powerful place to work with these energies. So really, in a sense, you can address anything with sexuality. If you're addressing your sexual energy in a healthy, full way, everything else in your life can be addressed in that way also. There also is the piece around emotional wellness and emotional health, because sexuality is a really powerful place to express, heal, and move emotional energy, whether it's positive or negative. And this becomes extremely important if you are working in business, right? If you're an artist, a creative, an entrepreneur, a coach, where your work is literally your alignment. If you're not aligned in your sexual health and your expression and your relationships, it's going to be very hard to express yourself in a powerful way. Maybe you can create a lot, but it will be difficult to actually live in alignment otherwise.
Absolutely. And how do you feel it kind of feeds into your masculinity and how you present as the embodied masculine?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a huge part of my journey. Relationships and Tantra has been at the core of my entire awakening journey and moving into entrepreneurship. I think also for men out there, like most men out there right now, there's a very small amount that are maybe psychopathic or abusive or perpetrators that get all the media attention and get all of the fear around them, which is a very real problem. Like there are a lot of men that are dealing with their sexual energy in a very unhealthy way. Most men I work with and what I experienced was being completely shut down or completely like stuck, right? A lot of men get stuck in the cycle of like porn, weed, alcohol, video games, or they go into toxic sports culture, numbing out. Their sexual relationships are quite limited and not really satisfying. And they'll just continue this pattern until a breaking point happens. And what happens again with the emotional layer is that a man who's not exploring his trauma and releasing it and actually grounding through his nervous system and his body is going to have a really tough time going into the other areas of his life with resilience and power and commitment. For example, if he wants to change his money game, he's going to have to change his sex game. If he wants to change his physical or mental wellness, he's going to have to change his sex game. If he wants to create a family or have an amazing partner, he's going to have to change that energy. And to me, it's at the center and at the core of everything.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah, what resonates in what you're sharing is this whole piece around addiction and sort of this numbing out versus leaning in. And so I've, over the last few years, been exploring with like heart rate variability technologies as a like quite interesting barometer for kind of nervous system balance. And what you just said with like grounding through the nervous system to really be present and be able to like experience in this moment actually all the things that the mind potentially dreams of and wants. Can you go a bit deeper into this? Like what practices, kind of making it a bit more practical, what people can do in order to actually ground through the nervous system into these experiences?
Yeah, I mean, for men, it's very, very simple. It's ancient stuff. It's obvious, and it's also like trending now because more men are realizing this. It's different for women, but similar. I always start with men. First step is, you're going to have to address in your nervous system where there's pain. So this can be emotional, psychological pain. This can be whatever it is. And any like thought or bodily contraction is going to have to be addressed, right? So we can go through shadow work. We can go through emotional catharsis and release. This can look like yoga, breath work, cold water exposure. I always tell men you need to lift, like lifting heavy weights. Strength training is probably one of the most powerful places to start as a man to actually build discipline, increase your body's and nervous system's integrity. Another part of this is semen retention. So I always tell men 21 days of semen retention is going to change your life. So a lot of men, every time they self-pleasure, every time they have sex, they ejaculate. And this is extremely depleting to the body. Trace minerals, nutrients, your life force, jing or qi, is being depleted in this way. Now, there are techniques to deal with this. A lot of them are sensitizing the body and the nervous system through the breath and through sexual practices and sexual yogas that can actually help you circulate and move that energy through your body so you don't have to always resort to that ejaculation. And a lot of men actually don't even realize this is happening. And when they do this practice, it changes their entire life. It certainly changed mine. The other one is around, having a practice or a release training, a physical practice to move your emotion. So a lot of men are either dealing with rage or grief. A lot of men are dealing with overwhelm or burnout, and they very simply need to get into the body. So this can look like shaking and bioenergetic exercises of intense breath work, of stretches, of nature immersion, fasting. There's a lot of ways to actually move emotional energy and unstick yourself, get unstuck. And so some of these will be necessary. And some of them you can't do alone. You actually need help or a facilitator. You need to do with a men's group. And that's kind of the last one I would say is you need a circle of men. So other men in your life, a men's container of some kind, whether it's a men's circle local to you or it's an online container. You need to be surrounded by other brothers where you can open up and share, but also just be challenged and have iron sharpen iron.
Do you find that what kind of stance do you take when it comes to the archetypes? Is it very purist Jungian, or have you sort of adapted them to fit your model of how you practice?
I mean, I think Jung is just the godfather, right? He just created this realm and identified it. He mapped the territory. I certainly have made them my own. Obviously, the book of Moore and Gillette, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, is an extremely powerful starting point. That's kind of a foundation, which I just haven't found a work that is as good as that for men. I definitely have adapted the archetypes into my own. Like I call the warrior the guardian now, and I work with clients. And I like, the magician more to me is more shamanic. I love the king, the sovereign. I keep that one the same. And then the lover can also play with the artist. There's a dance there, because there's obviously way more than 4 archetypes. There's infinite archetypes actually, but there's some that just have the same meta patterns and themes that show up again and again. So it's important to understand those. For me, it's very customizable. So, the archetypes won't matter to you, or they won't matter to a client I'm working with until they actually are personalized and they matter to that person. So for a lot of people, it's finding what archetype, whether it's a god or goddess, a hero, a character from fiction, a mentor that they identify with, and charging that and helping them unpack that. And it's like giving your consciousness or personality a super powerful tool that it can use and implement. And obviously you don't need the tool after a while, because you've integrated the experiences and insights.
It's such an interesting point, sort of this idea of integration, integrating it into your way of being in the world. And I find a lot of men struggle with that kind of identification and integrating that. And I mean, it resonates with me. I couldn't really identify with a lot of men in my world growing up. And that only came much later on, when, it was connecting to things that, much like sort of the characteristics in the archetypes that I could see in myself, or I could see that needed strengthening. And I wonder if you find that in the same with the guys that you work with.
I mean, ultimately, this is the quest of every man and every human, but especially men, is who am I? Like every man has to answer this question for himself, is who am I? And, what is my reason for being? What is my dharma? And what am I doing here? So that's a very personal quest, and it can only be answered by that man. There are archetypes and mentors and pointers along the way. And so if you just go all in and explore what you have to give and explore these archetypes, a lot can open up for you. A lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of, discovery and mystery will actually fill your life. And so for most men, it's really just, they need to get started. So this whole idea that, a man doesn't relate to other men, very common. Get started, find one man and connect to him. If you don't know what to do with your life, you feel lost, you feel confused, which for a man is one of the worst positions to be in, but also one of the most fruitful. Start something. Start where you are. Move in the direction of passion, move in the direction of service and purpose. As far as you can tell, do your best to start there. But the point is that you keep moving forward. A lot of men get stuck and then they stagnate, and that's when addiction and the numbness comes, and that's when all the trauma is created. So, a lot of this stuff is so simple. It's just the modern world has made it extremely difficult to navigate, because I believe we are in a meaning crisis. We're in a mythological crisis. That's why the planet is in this initiation with coronavirus and all these other things, to wake us the fuck up. And a lot of this has to do with men.
That's so powerful. Super, super powerful. How do you feel the feminine falls into that sphere?
I mean, the feminine is integrally a part of this, and is the complement, the perfect complement and opposition to the masculine on our plane of reality. So the feminine in men also has to be addressed. And obviously the feminine without in women has to be addressed also. So for most men, some of the most impactful things they'll ever do is choose their mate and have children and pass on to the next generation. Those will be huge heroes' journeys and initiations for most men. For other men, their biggest journey will be their life's work. And so the feminine is, and even then, like any man who's accomplishing great things is supported by an amazing woman and loved by an amazing woman. So there's something here around how the divide between men and women, the confusion around polarity and gender, any confusion around sexuality, the trauma around sexuality between men and women must be addressed. And most men, you know, once they get to a men's circle or they come into a healing ceremony or they are working with a coach, you know, some of their biggest challenges and what they want to talk about the most is their relationship to their women. And so this is actually ground zero for the transformation.
Yeah, that rings true with most of the men that I work with, 100%.
I think it's also interesting to see when you say it's really around the relationship to their women. Like, in what degree do you see that basically stems from their relationship to their mothers? Like, in how they related as kids, and potentially then, you know, the first encounters with women in a romantic sense, and yeah, like what's kind of the healing that you're facilitating in that space? Like, how to kind of like integrate that balance again?
Yeah, I mean, it does always go back to the mother and to the father, because those are our imprints genetically and, you know, personality wise as we were children of what a man and a woman is. So of course it goes back there. It doesn't stop there. It can go into the lineage and into the ancestry as well of patterns that the men and the women are holding. For men with their mother, you know, and I experienced this deeply also, it's like you have to understand that you will choose women that resemble your mother and the good parts of her and her toxic patterns until you become more conscious of that and actively forgive and break this cycle by forgiving and loving your mother as she is, not trying to change her or save her, and then being able to identify that in the partners that you're attracting, and then choosing a partner that actually is complementary and has a healthy pattern for you to experience. And so I think a lot of men are still fighting their mother, and this is not an easy thing to deal with, because basically you need to be around other men, not just your father. Your father actually can't do it for you. You have to be around other men, and this is where the rite of passage or the initiation comes into play, which has been really de-emphasized and lost in Western culture, because that's the energy that actually breaks the attachment to the mother and helps you form that mature personality.
Do you find that there's a big shame component in relation to the mother or to the father?
I mean, it can be both. It really depends on the man, you know. Shame is, of course, one of the biggest vibrations, along with guilt and blame and, you know, these emotional violences that create disconnection from ourselves. Because if you feel like you've been shamed, then it'll be very hard to manifest your potential in yourself. And especially if you're feeling ashamed actively, you know, this has to be dropped.
Yeah, I find that's one of the most important starting points in most of the therapy that I do as well. And it's interesting to see how the man in question navigates that space. It's immensely powerful, but immensely, you know, anchoring in their narrative in specific. Do you find that a big component of your work as well starts working on the inner narrative, the sort of the self-image of the man?
100%.
Yeah.
And this is where those archetypes come in. This is also where the man's mission, or what he's here to do, which can be anything, is key. And, you know, knowledge of self has to be won through inquiry, training, resistance, and exploration. And there's no other way to gain it. So a lot of men are just not taking risks. And so their identity or their narrative is usually in a victim or a very passive place. And that's fine to create safety, but it's going to be very challenging for a man who wants to create, you know, energy and action in his life and meaning, if he's not taking risks.
And also learning to be able to sit with that discomfort and specific in taking those risks.
Right.
I feel that when we speak about risks, the thing that comes through for me on that is that level of self-responsibility. That the moment you take a risk, you actually can't blame anybody else anymore. And if the thing fails, then yeah, there is the need to really feel like, man, okay, this thing didn't work, and like feeling like the sadness, the disappointment, whatever it may be. And I feel it's been a big part for me to really beginning to own, more of the shadow frequencies, and actually seeing that ultimately really is where I feel the power resides. Once that becomes integrated, that's when I actually did not dissolve. And I feel that was a big part for me to escape basically these unpleasant emotions for many, many years.
Right. I mean, this is the classic, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. So the emotion, the frequency, and the shadows, the parts of the personality that have been disowned or not claimed, the parts of the relationships where the pain or trauma happened, is actually where the magic is. And so the process of repossessing that territory, reclaiming that, stepping into it, is extremely powerful and important for a man to actually open up new vistas in his life. And again, a lot of this stuff's in the body. So you can't think your way out of this trauma. You can't theorize your way through these emotions. They're in the body and they have to be felt and expressed. So a lot of men, when they come to a men's retreat, I know when I worked with Sacred Sons, when they first started, you're basically doing exorcisms. These men are going into these ordeals and these trials. And whether it's through breath work or through family constellations or sweat lodge or plant medicine, or, there's many pathways, they have to unload this emotional energy that they've been holding maybe for years. And after that, there's a clarity, there's a healing that just naturally happens. The body will naturally come back to equilibrium. There's all kinds of miraculous shit I've seen that people don't believe, like, chronic pain and extreme, diseases disappearing when the emotion moves. And this is real. And this has actually been scientifically documented as well now. But basically, once that energy moves, the man has a choice. It's like, okay, now you have some clarity. Now you have some healing. Now you have to integrate this. And then it's like, now you're free of that burden, but all the patterns are still there. All the narratives, all the people in your life, all the positioning is still there. So then it just goes back to the old school, incremental change, discipline, training, routine, back to the basics. But ideally with a new sense of energy and positioning and targeting of where they want to be.
That resonates so much with me because I guess being in the world of psychology and therapy, it was really plant medicine that allowed me to get to that space of completely purging that real sedimented emotion. And like you say, it takes you to a place where you do get that glimmer of clarity, and it's like, oh, I get a little bit more perspective now in my life, and now I can actually take a different kind of stance in terms of how I want to deal with this life going forward. It feeds into a different sense of really stepping into your potentiality.
Certainly. I mean, plant medicine is definitely, it helped human evolution. I mean, there's a lot of ideas around this, but, these substances from the natural world that have been used by our ancestors for thousands and thousands of years, I mean, they are miraculous and they're extremely healing for the nervous system. They're extremely symbiotic with our consciousness, with the caveat of, you need an experienced, actual grounded facilitator, and you need to understand the risks and have extremely powerful support and integration around you to do these journeys into consciousness.
So true. So true. Before and after, most importantly.
Yeah.
Is this one of the things that you do as well? You do facilitate plant journeys and medicinal journeys?
I don't. I mean, I briefly considered it years ago because I was extremely into studying, shamanism and psychology and consciousness research. That's not something I do. I mean, it's something I'm open to years and years in the future. But I know my Dharma has steered me other ways. So I love ceremony. It's extremely important in my life. And yeah, anything can be a ceremony. Some people aren't equipped actually neurologically to handle psychedelics or plant medicine, and actually shouldn't do them. And that's real, and that's okay, because there's still many other modalities that can become as powerful as that, if not more powerful, in consciousness shift. And actually, tantric sexuality and sacred sexuality would be the one I would say that's actually beyond that.
So for someone sort of stepping into this conversation right now that really doesn't have an idea of what you just said there, what would kind of be a mini intro to invite them into that sacred space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about it. I'll use the scientific lens because I think a lot of people in our day and age put a lot of value on science. Basically, in a prolonged arousal state. So a lot of things have to be present here. So there's deep connection, there's emotional intimacy, there's a deep sense of love and bonding. There's a mammalian emotional oxytocin bonding. Heightened states of arousal. So everyone knows when you're like turned on sexually, you know, colors become more vivid. All your senses are cranked up 10x. The mind relaxes. The personality relaxes. Physically, you have a lot more energy. And basically, in these prolonged states, and basically, we're talking about non-ejaculatory orgasm for men, and for women, it's just, you know, any kind of orgasm you can imagine, full body, all parts of their womb. You know, you can reach these psychedelic states, especially using your breath, especially using sound, especially using various sexual yoga techniques, which are in the Taoist tradition in China and also in the Hindu tradition in India and all over the world. Actually, there's a Mayan tantra that I've realized, you know, there's plates inscribed here in Mexico and Chichen Itza about how Mayan warriors learned how to master their sexual energy. And basically, yeah, you'll get to a state where you'll release dimethyltryptamine and you'll release, you know, huge bursts of endorphin, serotonin, norepinephrine, you know, all these amazing natural drugs or neurotransmitters that we're getting from the plants. So, and that's completely without any substance. You're completely sober, but you're entering these spaces that are actually quite magical and extremely powerful for healing and transforming consciousness.
It's interesting that you mention all these neurotransmitters because it's effectively the same that comes through in flow states. Like when we're in that state of being totally absorbed by the thing that we're doing or the activity that we're engaged in. It's sort of this forgetting of self. That's kind of like experience of timelessness in a way.
That's it. I mean, so I made a course on flow states. I mean, I'm obsessed with flow states, and you know, these are some of the top flow states, what we're talking about. You know, instead of sex, drugs, and this is one of my favorite little things, you know, in the 60s, it's like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now it's, you know, tantra, psychedelics, and house music, you know, like, or whatever you want to call it. And these are all ways to get into trance, right? And what is trance? Trance is an ultimate flow state. And so this is what everybody's seeking all the time. This is why people get addicted to sex, drugs, or food, or, you know, people get addicted to emotions, because it helps them become present, engaged, and in flow.
Yeah, we had a question that was asking, like, how do we turn darkness into light? And I feel it sort of like fits in here with, on the one hand, yes, we can go into the addiction path, which is potentially like the darkness, and then we can go into the path of optimal states of consciousness, flow, which is ultimately light. And curious to hear your perspective on that. Like, what is the split decision between going left or going right?
Yeah, I mean, so darkness is just the absence of light. Like, darkness doesn't have substance per se. That's one way to look at it, right? From like physics. A way to look at it in consciousness is darkness is just the shadow. It's just what you haven't expressed or you haven't acknowledged or brought to consciousness. And so in that way, darkness is extremely powerful. Just like the dark, damp soil is what's needed to grow the seed of the tree. You have to have the darkness, and we live in a plane of duality. And so if you study natural law, you study psychology, you study addiction, you study any of these modalities, there's this binary duality there, and we can call it light and darkness. Now, I'm assuming in the context of this conversation that darkness is trauma, unmet emotion, parts of ourselves that are not open or expressed. So bringing them to light is an alchemy. Now, the flow state is a powerful form of alchemical transmutation. Sexuality can do this, you know, physicality, sports can do this, music and art can do this, business can do this, being of service. There's a lot of ways to take the dark parts, feel them fully, which is a key part, and then transmute them or compost them into something useful. And then you bring it to the light. And, you know, for me, a personal example is like my own traumas around the feminine, being cheated on, having terrible sexual relationships, being repressed, just having this awkward, really stunted growth with dating, relationships, and sexuality as a man. I was a very late bloomer. Now I've turned that darkness, which was a crippling anxiety, depression, insomnia, you know, alcohol, like all the ways I used to cope with that. Now I get to serve men, and I've become an author, coach, speaker on this topic, among others. And it's extremely important that I experience that darkness, because now I can relate to that in other people and actually help them find angles to transmute that. And so the most powerful people with the strongest stories have the most darkness. And that's not by accident. It's because there's a equal and opposite exchange that happens. And that doesn't mean you need to go out and seek darkness. Like, everyone's given by God or by the universe, whatever you want to call it, as much as they can take. So just take what you have and start there and start working on that and exploring it and feeling it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, a few years ago, I had this exploration of like turning addictions into advantages, and I feel it's been really a beautiful way of guiding people on, okay, like, what are the things that you're addicted to, and like the addictions, like, what is it that they cover? Because once you see kind of like what is it they cover and you see the wounds, then I feel we're uniquely positioned. Like, once we see the wound and we can heal it, then, you know, we have that framework of how we can support others in actually healing similar wounds. And that is where I see how we basically turn our darkness into light, taking the things that, we're covering with our addictions, and then seeing, okay, like, what is the advantage, the advancement that we can draw from that, rather than kind of wallowing in the pits.
Most addictions are superpowers if they're directed in the right way, and if they're managed in a certain way. Or if you find the underlying thing that's driving the addiction, that's actually where the mana is, or the magic, because it's actually a seeking for connection. The opposite of addiction is connection. It's not sobriety. You want connection to something, to source, to God, to a woman, to your body, to energy, to dharma, whatever. And so a lot of addictions fall in that territory.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful reframe. It kind of takes the shame out of it. And coming back to what Massimo was saying earlier, where, I feel that the shame component is when the energy just kind of collapses inward. While when we look at, like, okay, the thing is here, like, what can I do with it? And then, as you say, connection. I mean, that's Gabo Mate does so much beautiful work around that. Right? It's really, and it also relates to what you were saying earlier with having a men's group or having coaches. It is this necessity, I feel, to be connected to others in order to unpack oneself, and then be able to kind of repack it in a more aligned, more authentic way.
Totally. I mean, it's extremely hard to see your blind spots by yourself. And for men, especially, creating meaningful relationships with other men is one of the most valuable things you can do. Just like for women, creating meaningful relationships with other women, most valuable things you could do. Now, most people, I find, think they don't have this available for some reason. Like, well, there's not a men's group in my town, or like, I don't know anyone like this. It's only on Instagram or YouTube. And that's just simply not true. Even if you have to find a group online at first, you're always going to find someone near to you that's also a seeker, also on this wavelength. And I've seen it a million times where men are like, oh, there's no one. They come to one event or they go to an online container, they join a group program or whatever, and then they meet their people.
I've also seen the reverse where they've created the group themselves out of that necessity, which I think is equally a valuable starting point.
Totally, maybe more valuable, because then they get the experience from that.
Yeah, there's definitely the experiential component for both teacher and learner in that.
100%.
How does your family fall into the mix of supporting your work? Do you find that is an added component that helps you in life?
I mean, it's been a journey with my family for sure. I mean, they are now very supportive and love what I do, and even if they don't fully understand it. But certainly early in the journey, it was really difficult to face their disapproval, or like, they thought I should do one thing, and backpacking through Asia, living on savings, quitting a really good job, quitting the process to go to grad school. There were all these moments where they were extremely upset, and I just had to feel and face that energy of like, okay, I got to live my life. They're not going to live it for me. Yeah. And so, I've come to a place of just love and compassion for them. And, I think they're in that place for me also now.
That's a very special place, and I think a lot of men that I work with in particular struggle with that component. It's almost waiting for that acceptance of the family before they can embark on really that journey that they're needing for themselves. Yeah. But like you were saying before, the necessary risk.
Yeah, you have to risk everything. If you are really feeling called to do something, I think for a lot of men, it's very simple. It's like they're in a job they hate, or their career is not where they want it to be. Maybe they're living in a town or a country that they do not want to be. And especially now with everything happening in the world, they're like, wow, something's got to shift. Or they want to be with someone. They want to date a woman, or they want to be with someone, and they're just waiting. There's all kinds of ways it can shape up, but that risk, that journey, even if it fails, even if you get rejected, will be the most valuable thing you've ever done. And you can only realize that when you actually move towards it. And so a lot of men are just, they're waiting for permission from someone. And ultimately they have to give it to themselves.
That speaks to me 110%. I moved to Spain 4 years ago from London, being there for 16 years, and London was a black hole. Very correct. There was really that risk of take that leap of faith and jump right in and just make it happen regardless. Pack everything up and go.
It's huge.
So you're based in Tulum right now, or it's just a stopover?
Yeah, I mean, for a season, I'll be here. Primarily, I want to be based in Austin, but there's some events and clients I'm seeing, and also, wanted to switch it up from the winter. So I do prefer the nomadic lifestyle, but more and more I'm wanting a home base. I've found that, in terms of America, probably Austin and Miami are the most free in terms of what's happening with all the fuckery, and the most exciting. We're the most entrepreneurs that are interested in healing and men's work and crypto and tantra, and all the things are based and actually thriving.
There's been another question that came through that was around breaking the culture around toxicity. And he was saying there's like a whole movement of it out there, and how can light triumph darkness. Maybe it's interesting to hear your perspective of
I'm assuming that it's going to be about toxic masculinity.
Yeah, it seems like it's going that way. So, I mean, this may be a controversial opinion, but is toxic masculinity a thing? Yes. There are toxic behaviors, and there are men who are in machismo or like abuse or like, you know, egotism and all these things. Yes, we have all met these men. They are there. Now, as a culture and as a sweeping phenomenon, toxic masculinity is a media phenomenon. 95 to 99% of the men I've met, and maybe I'm in a bubble, I'm open to being wrong here, but then I go to these men's conferences where I meet working class men, I meet all kinds of men all over the world, in America and Europe, even in Asia, I've been to men's circles, and they're all the same, and all the men they know are the same. Yes, they fucked up. Yes, they've hurt people. They have their addictions. They have their toxic behaviors, but they're all at their core good and working on themselves, and they're just confused because they don't understand how to relate to women. Maybe they don't understand how to relate in the workplace. And the culture is telling them men are bad, men are toxic, blah, blah, blah. And so the media, in my mind, and there's a whole movement right now of censorship and cancel culture and shaming and blame. That's actually been going on for years now. It's just reaching a pinnacle right now, which is extremely dangerous. And, you know, I don't want to point fingers at the side because I don't know. I think it's coming from all sides. The left gets scapegoated a lot right now. But this to me is the actual issue. If like, let me put it this way. If these media people and the politics and the, you know, whatever, whoever is putting out these messages about toxic masculinity, if they actually wanted to address toxic masculinity, they would educate men. They would educate boys. Mm-hmm. They would fund men's circles. They would move in the direction of emotional, spiritual healing for men and teaching them sexual education and teaching them how to work with their energy and their rage and teaching them how to train themselves and reach optimal health and wellness and get their healing done, not shame them. So a lot of this toxic culture around masculinity to me is very much the problem is the problem, right? And for most men, we know what we want to do. We know how to live in purpose and alignment at our core, even if we're confused right now. And just do that and tune out people who are trying to shame you for being masculine or having masculine traits. And a lot of people would probably be upset hearing this because they want there to be a victim so there can be a savior. And there has to be a perpetrator, right? That's that triad. Always. A lot of people are in those trauma bonds with themselves or with others. And that's okay. We have compassion. Like ultimately, we want all humans to be happy and free and to heal. And you can't let this stop you from doing your work or doing your healing in the way it needs to look, right? And this is a whole nother conversation on emasculation and men being, you know, suppressed and put into a feminized or more weaker masculine role to appease or to create safety, apparent safety in the culture. And so that's kind of what I'm speaking to here, ranting now.
I think you're speaking, well, directly to me. It's definitely resonating, that's for sure. And I'm sure it's definitely resonating for a lot of people listening to this too.
I feel it's interesting what you say on the toxicity as well, that it's ultimately a kind of like inward turned level of power. And on the other hand, I feel there's also, a lot of women that seem to be needing to step up more into sort of like their masculine ways of being, which then creates anger and ultimately that kind of rupture and conflict between the two, rather than actually that coming together and mutual support. It's a bit of like role confusion versus, I feel, clarity on like, who are we and how are we supposed to show up and how are we supposed to like support one another.
Yeah, a lot of this is breakdown in communication and not having these tools on both sides of the masculine and the feminine to relate and move through the energy. And most of the toxic masculine stuff that gets put on blast is sexual misconduct or abuse or rape culture, often by people in authority positions. And so why is that happening? What's happening there? What's going on? It's like, well, And this is the part that I think some of the more radical feminists don't want to hear, and it's that women are creating that situation too. So when we have a culture of women owning boundaries, of women having sexual health and awareness, of them feeling empowered, feeling strong in their bodies, and feeling unashamed to speak their truth and actually claim their desire. And on the other side, we have men doing the same. And then having difficult conversations around attraction, around desire, around commitment, around integrity and sexuality. You know, this is a whole different culture. This is an entirely different culture that isn't celebrated, right? A lot of the cultures, it celebrates obedience. It celebrates hierarchy. You know, it's not about the patriarchy. It's about hierarchy. And it's about one human being lording over another, which has been going on for thousands of years. So this whole toxic masculinity thing and the Me Too movement, is it healthy and normal to have outrage? Yes. And like, thank God that people are speaking about this stuff now. We need this, actually. We need all this stuff to come into the light. Now, when it comes to shaming men and blaming them and blaming this whole culture, you're trimming at the leaves. You need to go to the root of how boys are trained and taught. You need to go to the root of how girls are trained and taught, and then when they become women and men. Because we can't just deal with symptoms. This is a root at the core of a lot of our civilization right now.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. I think this is a kind of conversation that could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I hope we get to come back to this again.
Yeah, there were a few questions along earlier, Kevin, where people can find you, and I put the link to your website into the chat. If there's any other things that you have going on right now that you want to invite people to, yeah, feel free to share it as well.
I mean, the best place to probably find my best content is on Instagram. So there's my handle if you want to follow me over there. I speak about this stuff a lot, and yeah, really grateful for you gentlemen. This is an important conversation, and we obviously need more of this roundtable discussion and, you know, leaders, embodied men and women, you know, going this way, because we've seen, you can watch the news and turn on your TV and see what going the other way looks like. So it's time.
Very true. Thank you so much for sharing the space with us. It was absolutely enlightening.
Appreciate y'all a lot.
Kevin, my man, thank you so much. Taking a lot away with regards to, like, how does it show up in the body? Because I mean, yeah, I feel the dialogue starts for me, the thinking process, and then it's like how do I bring it into my cells?
That's the way.
That's the way. All right. Beautiful humans.
Be well.
Thanks so much. See y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Have to.